everybody. It's Billy Nash. Welcome to the 13th podcast, Luxury Real Estate with me, Billy Nash. How's everybody doing? I hope they had a good, productive week. Did lots of deals, and we're back at it today to bring you some more great content. And today I have a special guest, which I'm super pumped about. It's a very big part of my business. And when we talked about, how you're building your business in the luxury real estate world, whether you have an established business or you're coming out of the box to build one, remember, surround yourself with people that can add value to the process. It'll help you grow. It'll help you do more deals. And this specific topic today is somewhat of a tricky one for some agents. For me, it's not, because when I first got my real estate license about 6.5 years ago, I specifically reached out to this individual who co-founded this company, and we hit it off right away. And I understood their process and how it could add tremendous value. And over the last 6 years, I've not only become a part of their agent advisory board, which helps agents all over the country, but I've also done well over $100 million in business and have helped execute other transactions via helping other agents, either on the sell side or the buy side for the luxury auction process. So with that, I wanted to introduce my special guest today, my man, my good friend, Chad Roffers, who is the co-founder of Concierge Auctions, which is now Sotheby's auction house Concierge. So with that, Chad is calling in live from beautiful Switzerland. How friggin' cool is that? What's up, Chad?
Hey, Billy. How you doing?
Very good, man. So first of all, how's the weather in Switzerland?
It's sunny and beautiful. It's a pretty magical place. I'd be lying. I had lunch with a colleague and two colleagues, actually. And I was sitting there and I said, you know what? I could probably sit in this spot and have the same lunch every day for the rest of my life and be perfectly happy. It's a pretty extraordinary place.
I love it. We spent some time, in the Italian Alps last summer, which began the Dolomites and into the Swiss Alps. And I absolutely loved it. I wasn't there in the wintertime like you are, but we loved it there in the summertime. So Chad, thanks for coming on. Thanks for calling in from Europe. And I know that you're out there looking at beautiful real estate for potential deals. And I do appreciate your time hopping on. So we're going to dig right in, Chad. We got a lot of people that listen to the podcast that are luxury real estate junkies that are building their business. They're entrepreneurs. And we love to bring them, ideas to help them with their businesses. So you and I met, like I said, about 6.5 years ago. Tell me your background, Chad, before you started Concierge Auctions. What was your background to create such an awesome business and process?
Well, I was 3 years old at the time, Billy, prior to starting. Just kidding. So, it's interesting. I was reflecting on that very question this weekend. So I've been in the real estate business about 23 years. And of the 23 years, approximately, Concierge has been established about 15. I think this is our 15th year. And then I spent about 2 or 3 years prior to establishing Concierge kind of learning more about the real estate auction process in conjunction with, at the time, a luxury brokerage business that I was running. So 23 years in total in the real estate business, almost entirely in the luxury segment. And then really the last somewhere between 15 and 20 years, really doing essentially kind of what the business that I'm in today is.
And so, Chad, when you started Concierge with Laura Brady, who's excellent as well, when you started the business, did you see a void in the marketplace to create Concierge? What was the driving factor to make you start the business?
Huge void, and Concierge was formed in 2008, which if everybody can remember back to, the world in 2008, it was a very, very challenging time, but the genesis of this business was established originated well before that, really in a really good market. And, you asked the question, prior to my career in real estate, I was in tech and spent a lot of time in Silicon Valley working with a lot of the household names today that we all know of, and saw, when I got into the luxury real estate business, the whole premise was there's a lot of what I learned in the tech space, the culture, certainly the use of technology to improve the way people transact, was at the core of what my philosophy was, or what the opportunity I saw in real estate. And so ultimately, the interesting thing is, even before I got into the real estate business, I thought there was a place for bringing more efficiency to the residential real estate transaction process. And what I identified was an auction methodology could and should be a part of improving the real estate process. But ultimately, before I got into the business, I recognized, and for many of the people listening to this call, this is not an easy business, a very nuanced business. It certainly takes. There are some people who get into it that are particularly well suited for it, but it's a difficult business. And I think if you actually broke down the odds of what it would take to be successful in real estate, I don't know if most people would take that on. But ultimately, when I started selling luxury real estate, I was like, wow, this is incredibly hard. This is incredibly inefficient. This is incredibly time consuming. There's got to be a different way, right? Fundamentally, and one of the things that was obvious was, you get a quality listing, it's either going to sell quickly or it's going to take forever to sell. And I think that the traditional process works incredibly well until it doesn't. And then when it doesn't, inevitably, it's a really rocky road. It's a rocky road for the consumer, meaning the seller, and it's a rocky road for the listing agent. He's now deceased, but his name is Jeff Hyland. He's probably one of the most influential luxury real estate professionals in the world, and he ran Hilton and Highland and Beverly Hills. And he told me once, he's like, Chad, I'd like to be the firstborn, the second spouse, and the third real estate agent. And he basically, what he was getting at was, in the high end, more often than not, the first time the property is listed, it doesn't sell. And what's the why behind that? And I think, it's I would say oftentimes they're priced improperly. And then I think some people could look at that and say, well, that's because the original listing agent overpriced the property. And then there are many instances where that happens. I think alternatively, especially in the top tier, oftentimes there is no right price for a property. And because there aren't comps, it's an incomparable property. And I think that's where, when we look at our business today, the Sotheby's Concierge business, I think, we sell all types of properties. Our average transaction is about $5 million. But I think where we really shine is in the 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 million plus market.
And when we've done several of those together, one of the things, John, many of those together. And one of the things that appealed to me as an agent, building a business, is that it created, a certainty which had a specific time frame. So my first deal with Concierge and Chad, was a $22 million transaction. And this particular property had sat on the market for over a year. And I was hired to come on as the new agent when that listing expired. And I immediately called Chad because coming from an investment banking, private banking world, I dealt with entrepreneurs that had built companies that would come to me and ask me to help them monetize the asset. So what we did was bring in the bankers to run a process. And that process had a finite time. It wasn't an open-ended transaction. It had a start, it had a finish. And that was one of the things that appealed to me the most with Concierge's process. I mean, listen, the global marketing and the relationships that they have with buyers all over the world by far is one of the best things you can possibly bring to the table for your seller. But knowing that process, that if in the traditional way could take a year or 2 years, then you get into the death spiral of lowering the price, which you don't want to be in the death spiral, the death spirals, what Chad and I called it. Running that process with a finite time keeps everybody at the table and creates competition for the property. And that's the way, the process, in a quick little 2-minute kind of description works for me. So I can bring in buyers from all over the world and run a process alongside of Chad's team that gets it done in under 60 days. Cash, closed, who's next? So,
well, you summed it up, Billy. I mean, I think, but I also think, when you think about your audience today, whether you're an agent or a high net worth person, it's certainly not for every situation. I'm a big believer in there's a lot of, it's interesting. I'm here in Europe at the moment, and we do a fair amount of business here. And one big difference in Europe from the United States is that there's not an MLS to speak of. Number one. Number two is that more often than not, brokerages do not cooperate with other brokers. So, therefore, it is a very challenging. It's incredibly challenging to sell a piece of real estate in Europe, in my opinion. And in the U.S., North America, Canada included, the MLS is a kind of a backbone or a platform for helping to connect brokers and buyers and sellers. It's really efficient. And it's interesting because that platform is really under attack. It's under attack at the federal regulatory level. There's lots of stuff going on, about that. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens over the next decade. My personal theory is it could end up being like the airline business, where it got deregulated and it was a mess for 20 years before it got, profitable again. And so I guess I bring that up to say, of course I love opportunities, and anybody listening to this, I'd love to work with you in the right situation. But I would say, we're an appropriate solution 10% of the time. 90% of the time, the advice I'd give a real estate professional or seller is the advice I give my friends when they want to sell their property, which is like, interview 3 agents, hire the one you like the best, go with the lowest suggested list price of the 3 agents you interview, and take the first offer, right? That's my universal advice for anybody selling anything as it relates to real estate. But if in 6 months it hasn't happened, then call me, before you cut the price, because you use the term death spiral, but it is, and that's where the technology and the tools that make selling a property in North America pretty efficient. You pick a good agent and they expose it properly. That technology, that exposure works great, but it can turn against you fast if you've been on the market too long. And that's one other thing that's been interesting over the last 15 years in kind of the evolution of the concierge business. The number of days that something's on the market before it becomes stale. Used to be a year, then it was 6 months. I see in some markets in the country it's 60 days today.
I agree.
Where if you haven't sold that property, you got a problem.
And also, I mean, everybody pulls up Zillow and they pull up realtor.com and they can see the history of the property. So once you start lowering that price, the first thing people think is, what's wrong with it? What's happening. So yep. I agree with Chad, exactly what you said. So Chad, let me ask you, so what do you think, and I don't know the answer to this, but coming from you, I think would be great. What is the one thing that you see agents, when you think of auctions, historically, the first thing you think is distress. What's wrong with it? But that's not the reality of what a luxury auction is. The finest wine, the most valuable collector cars. The Constitution of America. These are things that all have went to the auction house. What do you think agents, perception, their perception is distressed. How do they overcome that? First of all, they can overcome it by talking to me and seeing what I've done. But also, what do you think, Chad, to give advice to that agent when the first thing, distressed auction, something's wrong?
Yeah, I think the common mistake that I've seen made by many agents is, either fear or ignorance. And the other interesting thing is that more often than not, the seller is asking their agent, when you think about, okay, seller picks an agent, they want to sell their property, the initial kind of gusto, momentum of the initial listing, initial marketing campaign starting to die down, and the seller's getting anxious. And most agents, it's human nature. You don't have good news. A lot of times, you're in the mode of no news, and you go from wanting to talk to that seller to, oh my gosh, this guy or this lady's calling me and I've got nothing to tell them. Right. And so and I think, it's interesting because when you think about why you've been successful and coming from a banking background in the real estate business, you wanted to differentiate yourself by being innovative, providing solutions, aligning yourself with tools and technology that can help your clients. And that is that's like a kind of an open-minded mindset. You have open mind, you're willing to bring in help and support to help your clients get results. And I think that a lot of agents, when the results aren't coming, they get defensive and insecure. And the interesting thing is someday I'm going to write a book about the best real estate agents. And I've sold now real estate in, I think, 33 countries and 40 U.S. states.
I got to interrupt you. I got to interrupt you for 1 second. Will I be in the book?
Yeah.
Will I be?
What's that?
Will I be in the book?
I don't know. I'm only the 13th guest on this podcast, so I don't know. I'm not sure. But
well, listen, if you want to do you can do a cameo for the next 12.
But there's a good chance you're going to be in the book. And the interesting thing when I look at it in all the places that I've done and do business, and there's I'm thinking in my head there's 50 agents that I'm going to write about, and the interesting thing about those 50 agents is, I'm dating myself here, but like the United Colors of Benetton ad. Yep. Like all colors and religions and backgrounds, man, they're so the diversity of the top 50 agents in the world that I work with. It's remarkable how diverse they are, both male, female, what their professional backgrounds were or weren't. But the one thing that all of them have in common is a really healthy dose of insecurity.
Yeah,
and it's because it's really interesting.
It's the fear of failure. I'm telling you,
you're right.
It's the fear of failure. I've had it since I was a little kid. Like I always wanted to prove myself, and I still do to this day. It's the fear of failure. I mean, and that's what drives me.
But the difference, Billy. But for people like you, the difference is your that fear. You actually look for solutions versus getting defensive.
Correct.
And I think that's probably the number one piece of advice I can give, an agent listening to this is being a little insecure is probably good, because in the U.S. there's 1.5 million members of the National Association of Realtors. There's always somebody out there that's gunning for your listing. Okay. And it's a dog eat dog world. And so you have to be insecure, because if you're not, or at least a little paranoid, because if you're not, you're going to get your lunch handed to you. But, that said, it's like when you're feeling like, hey, I'm not getting the results that I want for this client, rather than getting defensive, you go on the offensive and you look for solutions. And the solutions, that's the difference.
We just talked about that, Chad, on another podcast. We said, I said this exactly what you're saying is you have to provide solutions. They're not issues and problems. There's things that need to be solved. Solutions.
That's it. And I think, and the other thing is that the consumer is, today's consumer, especially, in the strata that you deal in, Billy, in terms of the price point of the properties, the sophistication, the business acumen of your clients, they can actually handle bad news. Okay.
Agreed.
What they can't handle is lack of solutions, lack of communication, a lack of proactivity. And I think that's really where the rubber meets the road, and where the pros get separated from the also rans in real estate is the real professionals are proactive, and they're comfortable having tough conversations with their clients, and they're bringing them solutions. And I think, and that's, and ultimately I think that's the difference, because a lot of the other stuff is table stakes, is, getting a property listed, putting it on MLS. It shows up on Zillow and realtor.com in like 3 seconds. There's a lot of things that everybody has access to, but it's the differentiation that occurs with the best people is really when the tough, things get a little tough. And I think that's the thing that people, I think, really need to embrace, is like, when it's not going well, then, what's the problem and what are the fixes?
So Chad, you put together, you and Lara and your team, I guess it was about 4 years ago, a board of an agent advisory board to help bridge the gap with some of the agents around the country that were interested in the process, and how they can hear from people on this board to with their experiences, help with the cause. And so tell me a little bit, for just spend a minute of the purpose of the board. I mean, I'm on the board, and just the background of the 10 of us that are on there.
Sure.
Not all of the
amazing
10,
group of people.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but ultimately, it is kind of a reflection of what I've learned about the best brokers in the world. First of all, it's a very diverse group of people, both geographically, the different platforms they operate in. Some of them are independent brokers. Some of them work with large franchise organizations. Some of them are broker owners. Some of them are just individual agents. Some of them run teams. I mean, it's really a very diverse group. But the purpose of the board was and is to make sure that we're getting feedback from the best people in the business about what they're seeing, our business do or not do. And where, no business is perfect. But I think the best businesses are always sharpening their edge or their sword and staying, on that cutting edge and staying hungry and staying effective. But sometimes, people, you can fall into, you can get, I wouldn't say lazy is the word, but you can get set in your ways. And I think that when I look at the board, what I didn't want our business to do, even though we're the dominant firm in the world, we probably have 75% market share of the luxury real estate auction space globally, which is, very commanding market share. And I'm probably underselling that. But what I didn't want to do is get soft, right? And that board, as you know, Billy, nobody's shy in that group, and they're all incredibly successful. Like 0.1% of producers in the world are in that group, and they just they tell you how it is.
And we just had, just for the listeners, Chad, and Chad was just here. We just had our quarterly board meeting, and we all met here in Palm Beach. They actually went with the breakers on my recommendation, and the 10 of us were there with Concierge's, Chad's team, and just to be in the room with those rock stars and hear what's going on in their different markets and trading ideas and giving Chad giving Chad and Lara and his team feedback, and getting a pulse on the market is so valuable for our clients.
Huge.
It's so valuable for our clients. So, hey, Chad, we're gonna start to wrap it up, and I wanted to mention that we do have a auction that's coming in Fort Lauderdale, and it will be March 9th, and this property will go live. It's currently listed for $25 million. It has over 400 feet of deep water dockage right off the New River. You can fit 2 180-foot yachts behind the house. It's a point lot. It's incredible. I can't wait to get involved. I'm going down tomorrow to see the property, take some video for a specific client that I think wants to play. So we will be involved when that goes live on March 9th. Chad, if you had to tell me one crazy story in a minute or less, I know you've probably got a ton of them. What is, in 1 minute or less, and then we're going to wrap it up, what is the craziest auction story that you've been involved in a minute or less?
Well, Billy, I looked up your podcast before I got on this, and it has a G rating. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure if any NC-17 content is appropriate for this. But I will say, this.
You can go to PG.
All right, PG or PG-13. So, gosh, I'm going to take the fifth on the craziest. But here's what I will tell you. In addition to the 50 top brokers that are going to make my book, there's 50 sellers that will make that book. And it's interesting. I'm starting to kind of group them. There's an NBA Hall of Famer, probably the greatest NBA athlete of all time, Michael Jordan. There's an NFL Hall of Famer, probably the greatest hard luck to success story ever, and Kurt Warner. Multiple MLB Hall of Famers. Randy Johnson is one that comes to mind. Multiple NFL team owners. I think in the top 50, I think there's 11 billionaires that I've worked for. And the interesting, so what I would say is, if I had to boil it down into one thing, like what's the crazy thing? I don't know if it's the crazy thing, but what makes those people, and it translates also to the agent, what makes those people, the common denominator that makes them all successful is, I think, it's kind of a unwillingness to lose and a willingness to not only do the work to win, but to find the tools and resources necessary to win. And I think that's like ultimately, if your audience today is, if it's brokers who are aspiring to get into the business or brokers that want to get better in the business, I think that's the thing that is the best story I can share with all of them. And from the vantage point I have, which is like, you got to have the drive. Without the drive, you're not going to be successful. You have to have the talent, because you just do. But there's a lot of talented people who aren't successful. But the people who are talented and have the drive, they align themselves with the right team.
Agreed.
And I think that is in my instance of the crazy stories, like I was the specialist that came in to help those billionaires handle a situation, handle a problem. They were willing to get outside their comfort zone to solve their problem. Mm-hmm. And I think that's I know I didn't give the answer you wanted.
That's okay.
But I think that is a more important message for your audience.
Amen. So with that, we're going to wrap it up, Chad. I'm really appreciative that you joined us. I know that you're busy over there in Switzerland, and I do appreciate the time that you spent with us and, dropping some of that amazing knowledge that you have in the luxury, real estate space, luxury auction space. And to me, you are one of my heroes and also one of my mentors. We talked about mentors a lot, and Chad is the best. And I do appreciate you coming on the show. So with that, we're going to wrap it up, and we're going to have a successful auction in Fort Lauderdale. I'm fired up. Hopefully my buyer will be the winner. It's a no reserve auction, and we'll be hitting the gavel on that one in a few weeks. But with that, I want to thank you for listening to the podcast. We're going to wrap it up, coming at you hard. If you listen to your podcast on Apple or Spotify, give me a great rating and a good review. I love yous all, and I'll talk to you soon on episode 14.